There are now reports coming out of the Washington Post today that apparently U.S. officials say that Iran is now considering perhaps stepping back from its threats that it would directly attack the state of Israel and is rather hoping to direct Hezbollah into targeting Israel with a much larger attack. What do we actually know about that? And is there really any truth to these reports?
Well, I don't think we know either way. It's a very small circle of people that are involved in these deliberations or in decisions. Iran is a dictatorship. But we certainly do know that it's been about a month and the threatened and feared attack hasn't arrived. And I think to the degree that that is a surprise, it has to attach to things that happened that were unexpected. And I think the main thing that was unexpected is that the U.S. not only made very robust threats against Iran directly, but did it in public and in an escalating fashion. They began with threatening devastating consequences and then graduated to cataclysmic consequences. Now, the Iranian regime is weak. The people of Iran detest the regime, and there have been repeated bouts of protest there that the regime has suppressed rather brutally. I don't think they welcome a full war. They might have thought they can get away with some exchange with Israel that they can spin as some sort of success. But a real war with the U.S. Is a different matter altogether. I'm rather surprised that the U.S. Doesn't learn the delayed lesson from the success, if indeed Iran doesn't attack, and proceed to make, to basically throw its weight around in other areas of the region as well. And you mentioned Hezbollah. That would be number one. The situation in the north that we just saw reports about is completely unacceptable. And the risks of letting it get out of hand go beyond risks that only Israel is facing. A regional war that could erupt would affect the global economy at the very least and U.S. assets all over the region. I think it's about time for the global community to treat Lebanon as a failed state that is at the very least a regional problem and realistically a global problem.
You have to remember that Israeli troops on the border is a direct threat to Egypt's security. And as concerned as Israel is about its own security, they have to realize that the Egyptians are also concerned for their security. So that issue is going to be a continuous sticking block.
Our guest in studio, international security analyst Dan Perry, also wants to respond to this. And then I'd like to actually bring our panel kind of into the wider conversation here.
I mean, I understand about the 1979 peace treaty, but the idea that Israeli troops along the border with Egypt constitute a threat is a little bit preposterous, considering that there is just south of the Philadelphia corridor 200 kilometers of Israeli border with Egypt. And there is a certain limitation imposed on the troops that Israel can have, and in particular the tanks Israel can have, all across that 200 and some kilometer border. That's true. That can be discussed. But that the Philadelphia corridor in principle is off limits to Israelis if Israel had a good reason to want control over it, I think is something that I would expect the Egyptian government, as a pragmatic government that surely understands there's a pretty big problem in Gaza that is also Egypt's problem, because they don't want smuggling any more than Israel does, to be a little bit more flexible. I think they've climbed on a very high branch rather unwisely on this issue, and I would expect the Sisi government that is famously anti-terrorist to be a little bit more reasonable. And this is in no way to say that I think Netanyahu's policies are reasonable on the Philadelphia corridor, because Israel agreed to pull out in its own proposal on May 31st. This demand only came up after. There's a lot to be said about the actual utility of that corridor. The tunnels go under it, not through it. But putting that aside, for Egypt to be upset is frankly absurd.
Yesterday, for the first time, according to Egyptian sources, Sinwar asked for protection. He asked for permission that Israel will not kill him. And I believe, since he replaced Haniya, I believe that in the future we can think about the possibility to do something similar to Arafat in Beirut, and he can leave safely the Gaza Strip. Okay? It can be part of a new deal.
Right. So this, of course, suggests that perhaps he's willing to save himself in exchange for essentially sacrificing his people and the cause of Hamas. But can we assume that at this point, after everything that has happened, that that's really realistic?
That Israel would agree to it? Look, the fundamental question for Israel is the degree to which it wants to save the hostages. Israel cannot be expected to pay any price, right? Like, it can't change the name of the country to Palestine, probably. But there is something like 3/4 support in Israel for the original deal, where Israel would pull out and end the war and leave Hamas in place in exchange for all the hostages. And we haven't yet mentioned the hostages on the show here, but there are 109 hostages that are alive still in Gaza, and the majority of the people in Israel want to prioritize that. Is there some mechanism that can enable Sinwar to accept the additional conditions that Israel is now demanding regarding the presence on the Philadelphia corridor? I don't know. I've been saying for months that part of Israel's toolkit might be allowing Sinwar and another 1,000 scumbags that are his entourage to depart the country and give them safe passage to Qatar or whatever other ally of Hamas that might deserve them. Can Israel give him a life insurance policy the way he appears to be asking? By the way, it is rather comical because his whole raison d'etre in life is to be a martyr, and his moral standing in Palestinian society is his willingness to risk his life. But if he's willing to trade his life for an end to the war, then I think, as Avner says, Israel might be wise to agree.
We must remember that the Hamas will not release all the hostages in one time, okay? And I believe that he will keep some of them forever, like a diamonds. And that's the problem. If we will make a deal, it will be maximum 20 hostages, and then they will keep all the soldiers, they will keep all the men.
If you look at the May 31st deal that was presented as an Israel offer, it does include implicitly a return of all the hostages in exchange for a full pullout from the West Bank, including from the Gaza Strip, including the Philadelphia corridor.
But of course, the question is whether or not
that was presented as an Israeli offer.
Yeah, but the question is whether or not Hamas is ultimately truly interested in doing that, because it's the only pawn. The hostages are the only pawn that the terror group has at this point. But we have to move on to Iran.
To be clear,
as much as I would like to continue to talk,
Israel added conditions when it looked like Hamas might agree.